Mhm.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Gaming with ADHD. Yes, I know it is 7:30 at night for us weirdos here in Arizona, but it doesn't matter. It's always morning for somebody. So, this is a special Tuesday edition of Topics and Tangents. I am joined by my friend Andrew. Say hello, Andrew.
Hello.
And we are doing it today partly because just timing. I've been needing to get Andrew on for months, but I'm a horrible friend, and so
I would
I'm
say that.
yeah. Please accept my apology, sir. But Andrew also had a new game come out, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Sneak preview. It's Star Trek. Anyhow, all right, we'll put that back. Anyways, so yeah, so we I wanted to get him on, be able to talk to him, because then we're also going to do some extra streams later on where Andrew's coming back. So we'll talk about that another time. So Andrew, introduce yourself to everybody.
Hey, I'm Andrew. If you follow the show, you probably met my brother on a previous video. Michael Haught is my brother, so I'm the younger brother, Andrew Haught, slightly improved model.
Slightly improved, much
no,
better
not really.
beard.
Yes, definitely. This is a new COVID beard. I didn't have this before, and now it's a thing. So,
I'm, you know,
yeah.
I can't say you made a poor choice, sir.
No,
So,
it's finally growing in. Like normally, it would be like a patch here, and this is missing here. And it finally started actually doing stuff. I'm like, wow, because it's not growing up here. So I guess down here's where it comes in. So yeah.
Yeah, getting past that little patchy stage where you're like, this looks really gross. Actually, speaking of Mike, hello, sir, from the future, I might add.
How's the weather?
So he's probably freezing his toes off right now.
There.
But anyways, sorry for distracting. So
Yeah.
you are the younger brother of Mike, and what else makes you special?
Oh well, I design games. It's one of the things I do as a pastime. Michael and I started designing games since I was 8 or 10, somewhere around there. And we haven't really stopped. I remember. Let's see here. Yeah, I think I was about 9 or 10, and my dad picked up Photoshop, I believe, and Michael and I were playing around with that on the computer, trying to get it to make cards for us. Michael found out a way to make a template, and we just started making card games. I think first we made fit cards for Decipher games, and then Michael made a military naval game out of cards, and we played that for a while. I tried to make a Braveheart and Harry Potter card games and stuff like that. It was a lot of games very early on, but one of my earliest games I started working on was a Doctor Who game, and through the magic, I finally got to produce that game, and kind of that's what pushed me into being a board game designer. I was kind of a web help guy at Battlefront for a while, and we got the Doctor Who license, but all the people at Gale Force 9 were tied up with other projects. And the manager's like, well, maybe I'll look for outside help for this one. Maybe we should look for a commission guy. And I'm like, hey, I have a full game ready to go. And yeah, that's how I became a board game guy. It was overnight. It was like, it was ready to go. One of my managers was like, hey, no production time for designing the rules. That's great. We can just go right into playtesting and doing all that stuff. I'm like, yep. But yeah, it's been a weird and wild ride. The whole board game and miniature game design stuff. Something I don't think Michael and I we always wanted to do. In fact, we wanted to be Decipher. We wanted to work for the Decipher company ever since we were kids. Sadly, that company isn't around anymore. But yeah.
Are they not around? Because I thought like they've okay. This is gaming with ADHD, so just be aware that tangents will happen. I actually thought.
I believe they do the detective stuff, the original stuff they were doing, but I believe the company folded after one of the two brothers. I could be wrong about this, so I don't think it's a great assault. Embezzled a bunch of money, and the company folded.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of the card games kind of went to fan-based creation stuff. But yeah, the company kind of just started going downhill from there. They lost the Star Wars license to Wizards, and Wizards did nothing really fantastic with it. They made a kind of a bad card game that went away. You remember that one?
Oh man, that was their. None of their stuff was good.
They were trying to do a 3D generated artwork before the Final Fantasy 3D movie came out, so like way back in that day. So
yeah.
So it was not great. And yeah, the game wasn't anywhere near as good as the Star Wars Decipher game. And yeah, it just didn't take off. And then Star Trek survived for a little while. Lord of the Rings kind of took over as kind of the main game for a bit. But I think there was some kind of internal issue, and then the company kind of folded, which is sad. But
yeah, that was actually a big thing of mine for a while back there, late 90s, early 2000s. I was playing Star Trek, I was playing Star Wars, just because some friends that I made after I got back from Brazil, they were playing it, so it's like, oh, I can get into this. And I thought they did really good stuff, but yeah, then they just kind of collapsed, and it was weird because they I thought they'd been kind of doing some stuff, but it was like just online, and so
Fight Club stuff.
Yeah, but then that went away as well. Anyways, but
yeah,
regardless,
the secret of the Decipher games, Michael and I have always told this to each other. The secret of why the Decipher games were good was that they weren't really a card game at heart; they were board games that were disguised as card games. Because you created a board, you created a world, you moved from location to location and stuff. That was just a modular board in a card game format, and that's, I think, why they did. In my mind, I like them better than like Magic and those kind of games that were like, where are you fighting? Like you just kind of you just attack each other across the table. It's like there's no place, no feel to it. Where the Star Trek ones, you built a world together and then you played on it, which is something I always liked. Same thing with Star Wars.
I had not considered that, but I mean, obviously, from a couple of game designers, that doesn't really surprise me that they would come to that conclusion. So,
yeah.
Well, let's circle back to that. Let's get to know you a little bit more. So, I know you're here in Arizona now, but just for those who may not have seen the Mike Haught interview, when did you end up in Arizona?
Oh,
and where were you before that?
Well, Michael and I grew up a lot. I mean, went around a lot. We moved around Minnesota, Idaho, mainly a lot of Idaho for me, because Michael's older. I think he has more childhood in Minnesota, like memories in Minnesota, but I remember Idaho the most. And then, yeah, Michael moved to New Zealand to work for Battlefront, and I moved to Arizona when he moved to New Zealand. And I started working here. I think at the time I was planning on going back to school because I was still working in college. I wasn't working in college, just working on my college degree. And I think I was working at McDonald's at the time. And Michael went over and did that, worked for Battlefront. That was a crazy ordeal. Michael and I were like looking at that. Michael like, should I go? I'm like, yeah, you should try. And so he tried, and we were not expecting to get in there. And in fact, after working there, it's kind of almost like the perfect storm of how he got the job. It was like the right time, the right place, and the right, moment for him to actually do that. It was kind of a lot of dominoes kind of falling in a row. For me, it was a little different. I was up here playing Flames of War at the local store up here, and the owner of the store asked me to kind of take charge of a lot of the Flames of War aspects, like help him run tournaments and events. And so I started doing that. And for me, and Michael, I believe, is the same way, is tournaments are fun, but not really where we love when it comes to games, especially miniature games. We like that narrative play, that kind of big story-driven gameplay stuff where we do like the big D-Day games and stuff like that, where it's not really about who wins or loses, it's just more about the experience and creating stories. And so I created a campaign system for the local store that I wanted to run that was a kind of almost RPG-like for Flames of War. We had a small model and it got more abilities as you went through. And I sent it to Michael because he was at that time working on rules and books. I was like, hey, does this seem balanced to you? Because Michael and I are kind of a yin yang when it comes to like making board games and stuff. We work really well together. Whereas I like a lot of special rules, and I like, all that kind of chunky stuff. And Michael's really good at like the history and applying the history and stuff like that. So when we work on games together, we both kind of take different aspects to it. So I really value his opinion on pretty much anything I do. So I said that to him. And while it was there, the boss kind of picked up the campaign. It's like, hey, this looks really cool. When are you going to present this? And it's like, oh, this is my brother's campaign. And it's like, well, get in contact with him. Maybe we'll do something with him. And so we ended up doing a commission thing. And that came out to be part of the casino book for Flames of War, which turned into Infantry Aces. And so that was kind of how I got introduced to designing for Flames of War and doing stuff. Was my campaign system got basically introduced in there, and a lot of other people came in and helped flush it out and balance it and do a bunch of stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, then that book went on to win an Origins Award. So then that kind of sparred more requests for more stuff. So I did a bunch of other aces. So I had mechanized aces, tank aces, and stuff like that coming out in other books. And then it just got too hard to work from here and New Zealand. So the request of moving over there and becoming a full-time employee. What my role was kind of in quotations we didn't know at the time, because they didn't really need another writer at the time. And so they didn't know what I was going to do. I think I ended up getting blanketed with a bunch of other new hires where they decided to create a social media team was the idea. And so I ended up being part of that, but I was also part of the Flames of War website. And so I went there and I started working on web stuff, and that's when we acquired Dust. And then I ended up getting swept into the whole Dust thing, where I helped write the new, at that time, the new Dust rulebook. I created almost all the web content for Dust. So there's a bunch of web lists and stuff like that I did for Dust. Had a lot of fun. In fact, you can tell that I got into Game of Thrones during that time, because a lot of the web lists were Game of Thronesy. Like there's like a Winter Wall Russian, where all the dishonored Russian troops had to go and defend the wall between them and the zombie hordes of Germany and stuff like that. And so, you can see that kind of blood through. And so I was, so I was kind of started working on Dust, started doing that. And then the Facebook team kind of went away, because that was, I think, wasn't producing what was wanted from that thing. So that just became more web team then, and working on the website. And I kind of joined that team. And then a couple of things happened. Like I said earlier, the Doctor Who thing happened. I'm like, hey, I have a game ready to go. And then at the same time, we had this idea for... Sorry,
hold on a second. Was Doctor Who, were we talking about that backstage, or did we talk about that on stream? I forget now.
I don't know. So basically, Doctor Who came up, and there was nobody on the team for the Gale Forstein team to work on it. Everybody was in a project. And so there was no time. So they were talking about getting outside help. And I was getting a little frustrated, because I had no idea how to approach the subject that I had a game like ready to go. And then one day the boss was like, hey, I noticed that you've been preoccupied today. What's going on? I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Well, to be honest, I have this game, and I don't know how to say that I have this game, because I'm a web guy, not necessarily a board game guy, but I've been working on it since I was 10. And here. And so I had to, I kind of gave him like a little brief of it. He's like, oh, just go home, write something up, and come back, and we'll see if it's something we want to do. And they're kind of excited about it. So I went home. Actually, I didn't tell you this earlier. I have the game finished, but it was almost a carbon copy in a lot of ways of the old Star Trek card game, with skills and stuff on things. And I didn't like the skill mechanic, because there was a yes/no mechanic in the game. Yes, you passed. No, you didn't pass. There was no randomness to it. There's nothing you could manipulate other than having the right skills there. And with Doctor Who, you had less companions, and you would have people on your ship stack, because you had less skills. And so I just didn't like that mechanic. So I went home and I developed a whole new mechanic overnight that completely fixed it, which turned into the dice mechanic that the game has, that you roll the skills instead of do stuff. And I was looking at, it's funny, everybody thinks I was looking at Elder Signs, and it gets compared to Elder Signs a lot. But actually, I was just looking at and playing around with King of Tokyo. And that gave me the idea of skills being on dice. And then the whole mechanic changed, and that core mechanic changed almost the whole aspect of the game. And now you can kind of see the Star Trek roots, where you have adventures that you go on that have a location, and on locations a dilemma that flips over, and then it gives you a list of skills you need to pass, but they're on dice now, so you can kind of see like where this like the influence of the Star Trek card game comes from in there, but at the same time it's now a whole nother mechanic that's closer to, I guess, Elder Signs is what I was told later on. But yeah.
Well, I'm gonna have to definitely look for that when I finally get to play it. So you've been designing games since you were 8. When you went to work for Battlefront, now, I mean, obviously they knew that you were capable of game design. Were you just doing web stuff, or were you still like contributing, game material from time to time?
Big thing is when you start in a company, like Michael started off as a book writer, and so that's kind of how he was seen going through for a lot of the stuff. Is like he writes books and does that stuff. I was kind of seen as a campaign writer and a special rules guy, where I made a lot of like heroes for books. So in fact, the first hero I put in was the Cossack hero. This is before I even started working there. I was visiting my brother once, and Phil was working on the Russian book, and I wrote a Cossack hero for him. I did a bunch of research and put him in there. But yeah, that's kind of what I was known for. So I was put on the web stuff as kind of a guy to put up articles, maintain the website, and then help with the organized play side of things.
Okay.
So I did a lot of things. And of course, like I said, when Doctor Who started, it was kind of right when I was transitioning from being just a web guy to obviously being a social media person, because I also did all the tweets and everything, which, to be honest, I'm the worst person to choose for that job. I am the worst speller. I have like hardly any good grammar and stuff like that. I'm always double checking my stuff. So to make me in charge of Twitter, where you have these quick things, and so we had these things that like we had this thing called like Haught or something like that sent out like you could pre-program tweets to go out
right
days and stuff like that. So I would do that, and it would take me probably twice as long, maybe 3 times as long as anybody else, because I'm double checking all my spelling, my grammar. I'm going through Google to make sure I'm not doing anything wrong.
At least you're checking.
Yeah. But yeah, so I was doing that. But then that happened. And another thing that happened, which was kind of a unique situation, Phil was sick and he was not in the office. Wayne was really busy, and I don't remember I think Michael was also quite busy at the time.
Real quick, who's Phil?
Phil Yates is the guy who invented Flames of War.
Okay.
So Phil Yates, and then Wayne Turner is another writer at Flames of War. He's another really talented writer. And of course, my brother Michael, who's another talented writer. We're all working. So Phil was sick. So Wayne, I think, was taking on most of Phil's work, and Michael was doing a chunk of Wayne's and his work at the time, trying to finish books and do stuff. And a project came across where we wanted to have a magazine insert, which was going to be a mini tank game, which was going to be like, we're going to give out a couple free tanks, and we want a small game you can play with it, which turned into a larger project because everybody in the office, and I mean everybody, was into X-Wing at the time. And we really loved that game. And I think this is probably the only project that every single person in the office worked on, which was tanks. And we started that project off. It was supposed to be just a little one-off magazine thing that turned into a full-fledged miniature game. And so as we were writing it, and I was doing Doctor Who, I just started doing Doctor Who, there was no other writer free to take charge of that project, so I was given that project. And so pretty much, aside from designing the core rules and stuff, which was a team effort, the manager at the time and me would sit down and take everyone's ideas, and we would edit them down, pick the ones we liked, and then made a rule book out of it. And then when Phil felt better and was back at work, he helped finish up the rule book. But from then on, every tanks thing was my project as well. So I pretty much designed every tanks expansion that's come out, and every other variant of tanks, Modern War and stuff like that, based off of the thing that pretty much the whole studio worked on. But yeah, that was my main project, aside from the occasional board games.
Yeah, no, that like I know I'd seen tanks. I feel really bad that like I've known you for this long, and it's like, oh yeah, I've seen that one. No, I haven't played that. Oh, I've seen that one too. No, I haven't played that yet. We are definitely be fixing that here eventually.
Oh, yeah,
we
sure.
talked about the timing difficulties.
Yeah.
Get into that later.
People with ADU trying to plan things is great.
What's planning?
Exactly. It's messaging each other. It's like, hey, do you want to do this? Sure.
So, All right, so they just, I'm assuming they then just start pulling you into projects. Yeah, it's like, oh, hey, we need someone on this. Throw it to Andrew, or was it?
Yeah,
Were
I
you
love
actually?
odd jobs at the time. And a lot of times I get pulled into any meeting about like books or stuff like that because one of the things that I was pretty good at, I'm guessing this is why I was in the meeting, but most of us were in the meetings. But I think one of the main reasons I was pulled in there was I can problem solve and come up with like a rule fix or something that sometimes on the fly. It's the power of ADD sometimes, being able to
Right.
blurt out something. So every once in a while I would have a nugget that was worthwhile. But yeah, and I was always consulted. Phil and I and Michael and Wayne, all the writers kind of would stop and ask each other questions like, "Hey, what do you think about these points? Would you buy this for this many points? What if it was this points? Oh no, I wouldn't buy it for those points." So that kind of thing to get like that general feel for when we want to start playtesting things, stuff like that. So a lot of that work, a lot of web work, a lot of just like community building stuff too. Like I would do like around Halloween, I would have like a tank or treat mission for tanks, where you go around and you trick or treat with your tanks while you're trying to shoot your opponent and stuff like that, and little things like that, which I always think is fun ways to get the community involved in your games. But yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I love a lot of those just like just silly fun rules where it's like it lets you have a lot of fun but get away from a lot of the competitive aspect. You're just like, I mean, obviously there's going to still be some competition, but being able to not always worry about the tournament game or the 3,000 points and 5 regiments on a site. I'm making up combined words, you know what I'm saying. I think those do a lot for just building the community, building the game, so that it does, it gives people a reason to come back, as opposed to, oh, that guy just trashed me last week, I hate him now, I'm not going to come back anymore. So
one of my favorite projects, and I think Pete, the guy who owns Flames of War and Battlefront, is probably the only one who kind of saw the merit in it and let me run with it. But a lot of people were kind of questioning what I was doing. Was I created a league for Flames of War that was all about painting and hobbying. I call it the Hobby League. And so instead of earning points from just playing games and winning games in a league, you earn points for building models, painting them, and stuff like that as well. So because we just started the new edition of Flames of War, and I wanted something that kind of mirrored how I got into Flames of War, which was encouraging stores to have people paint in the store together and have that kind of community of just hobbying together and chatting back and forth. Because for me, that was a huge part of why I liked miniature games and why I continued going in, was our local store played a lot of those types of things. And being able to sit down, talk to somebody, shoot the breeze kind of thing while you're painting, and then asking questions, hey, how would you highlight this? And then you become a better painter and you kind of get into it. And so I wanted that experience for the players. So I created a whole league that was just about that. And I think it's probably one of our most popular leagues that we ended up having, because I brought people into the store, brought people into painting and doing that as a community. And I think, I don't know, it was just something different. It wasn't competitive. It was something you could go, if you weren't competitive, you could go and hang out and you could actually earn points towards, well, we had like prizes, like rewards for like, you got like special acrylic rulers and tokens and stuff like that if you reach certain thresholds in your modeling and hobbying and stuff. But yeah, it's just a different type of league. And so those kind of things are kind of the things that I really think I brought to the kind of Flames of War experience, was kind of the casual aspect of playing the games and doing stuff.
No, I think that's actually fantastic. What edition of Flames of War was that? Because I'll be honest, I don't remember hearing about that one.
It was right at the start of this current edition. And I believe, what is the current edition? Is it 4th edition right now? 5th edition?
I don't remember. I'll be honest, it has been a long time since I've dropped some World War II tanks on the table.
To be honest, it's been a few years for me as well. That's why I'm kind of trying to remember. And of course, asking a game designer what the rules or something for something is also quite difficult, because I remember every rendition of those rules, and Oh yeah,
Wait, does it work this way, or did we change that?
Flames of War is harder because, like with Aliens and like Doctor Who and those kind of games, it's easier because I designed those ones, so I was kind of the main designer, so I know all the changes had to go through me. But like when it comes to Flames of War, it was like, well, did Phil put that in the rules? We talked about it. I don't think we ended up going with that route, that kind of thing.
So, right.
Yeah, and there's a lot of give and take in those kind of situations too. When you with that new rule set, the rules looked a lot different than they did at the end, and there's a lot of going in and you're like, oh, actually, I like this, but I don't like this. And like, why don't you like this? Well, this is the feelings. Okay, well, let's look at that kind of stuff. And so, Flames of War, the newest edition, had a very big crucible it went through to go from where it started to where it is now, and I really think we made a pretty good version of it out of that. Mm-hmm. But it was a lot of discussions, a lot of talk of just like, we spent like a day talking about observers, or artillery, just like for a whole day, and it's like, it's weird you're talking about like one small aspect of the game, but it can take a week to sort out, trying to figure out exactly how it should work and when I mean, what you should add, what you should take out. But anyway, sorry, I'm just
No, trust me, I do not mind letting you talk. So when did you propose what year was it that you proposed the Doctor Who game to them?
Oh, this is a hard one.
Roughly.
It was doesn't need to be roughly 10 years ago, because I remember it was the Matt Smith special that was going on for the anniversary when I was working on the game. In fact, I remember working on the game and seeing the Paul McGann little special that they did before this thing, and I was so excited to see Paul McGann again, who was the 8th Doctor. But yeah, it was a long time ago. In fact, Doctor Who was done and polished before Star Trek Ascendancy was finished. But Star Trek Ascendancy ended up being brought out first because it hit the anniversary, where we started Doctor Who during its anniversary. So we delayed Doctor Who to send out Ascendancy a little bit earlier. It's actually one of the weird things with games, like Aliens was designed and finished before the Firefly Browncoats game was even started. The first core game was. The expansions came later, but the core game was pretty much done before that started. In fact, we used parts of Aliens for like the double-sided character cards and stuff like that. That concept came from the Aliens game for Brigands Browncoats, but it's just when you release things and the windows and stuff like that, and licensing agreements and all that stuff kind of delays things. But yeah,
interesting. Okay, so yeah, no, like the reason that I was asking that is so the Doctor Who game that got released, how close is that to what you actually presented them, or did that even still go through a lot of revisions?
That of all the games I've designed, I actually didn't go through very many changes. In fact, after I presented it, it's the core game stayed pretty much the same. One major change, and it came from one of my friends, James, was looking at the dice system I had. And the game, the way it works is that you get the Doctor produces black dice, which have 6 symbols on it. It's a little D6 with 6 different symbols, and each one of those represents a skill. Because the Doctor knows everything, he has all the skills on his dice. And then there are colored dice.
Real quick, this is the Time of the Daleks game, right?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. All right.
Yeah. Visual aid. This one right here. As I knock things over.
Okay.
So yeah, Doctor Who Time of Daleks. The black dice have 6 symbols on them, and each symbol represents a skill. And so the doctors in the game can roll black dice because they have Doctor rolls black dice because he knows everything. He has every skill. Whereas companions take those dice and turn them into colored dice, which are green. There's a green one, a red one, and a blue one. And those dice, when I first started, had 2 symbols on it. So they kind of focus the Doctor on what's important and what they know. So Amy would focus the Doctor on diplomacy and running. And like Rory would focus the Doctor on sciencey stuff and stuff like that. So what they know, they can kind of focus the Doctor into what's important. So you can kind of change your dice pool to get to kind of focus it to the skills you need for the task on hand. And it's kind of the dice drafting aspect of the game. But James came to me, he's like, what if you took one extra step and made it so that the dice has 3 of a base skill to a secondary skill, and then one skill that's from another dice on it, so that they were a little bit more useful when you had to, pull them together, and had a little bit more of an impact of the kind of the chance of getting symbols and stuff like that. And so I think that was the biggest change to the actual core mechanic of the game, because that meant that the odds changed on the dice. Instead of being 50-50 dice, some of it was 50-50, some of it was 1/3, and one was a 6th chance on the dice to get that particular symbol that you want to roll. And so other than that, most of the core game, other than names of cards and stuff like that, stayed the same. I had a couple, because as a kid, I started off in the old Who, and so a lot of my names were just instead of, there's a card set in here for all your little equipments and stuff called timey-wimey cards, but they started off as the TARDIS closet cards, because that's what I called it when I was a kid, was that, and it was kind of a boring name, and our graphic designer was like, why don't you call it timey-wimey cards? And then he put the whole quote on the back of the thing and had the word timey-wimey in white kind of pop up, so it just looks really cool. And I was like, yeah, that's perfect. And so little things like that changed, but pretty much it's still the same base mechanics of things. Oh, actually, one of the biggest changes that the graphic designer did, the mechanics stayed the same, but it was an amazing change, was that he changed my locations from being a card to a round location, and changed the dilemmas to being round as well. And then they plug in like this, and then you have your skill symbols like that. So I can't do that very well on the thing, but anyways, you have your 6 symbols there, and those are what you have to roll to pass to those 6 symbols. And so it was kind of a cool kind of cool
surprise.
Great idea. Something I fell in love with instantly, and I really like the idea. So they come on like this, and you flip them when you go, then you can see the word dilemma stuck from the old Star Trek.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that now.
Oh, this is a particular card on the Brain of Morbius. This particular episode, my dad would joke about the Brain of Morbius constantly, and so I had to make sure that was in there. It's a family thing, so it is a good episode and a key thing. But it's like I have to have a Brain of Morbius card in there, because Dad always joked about the Brain of Morbius constantly. So I was like, oh yeah,
got it. So, and so then what would you say is your, well, let's back up a little bit. So looking through your list of games, most everything that I see is usually some sort of a license title. Is that just kind of we'll call it an accident of your situation, as far as you're working with Gale Force 9, they've got licenses, so you're like, I like all of these things, I'm going to build stuff for it.
Yeah.
Or is it?
I think it's because Gale Force 9 started off with Spartacus and Firefly as their kind of 2 flagship games, and those were kind of designed before I got there. And that was kind of the Gale Force 9's thing, was to do licensed games. And so that's kind of all they did. And so that was pretty much until Michael designed this game here. The visual thing. Michael's game Tusk.
Yes, I've seen it. I have not played it yet.
Yeah, that's my unopened copy. I have that particular game is the only non-licensed board game I think they had, until they started rebranding a few of their board games. They rebranded Sons of Anarchy into Wise Guys, which is now kind of a prohibition alcohol running game instead of that. And then they rebranded Spartacus to be just historical Spartacus, because all those characters are historical. They just kind of did that. So now those 2 are no longer franchise games, but that's kind of where GF9 sits a lot, is franchise-esque games and doing that route. But they've started branching off into new things recently, so maybe one day I'll be able to do one of the several games I've been designing at home for that. But yeah, I've been working on a game with Marcel. He is a board game designer from the Netherlands. It's one of my contractors I do now.
Is he the guy that did I know Orange is in the title of the name.
Yeah, Orange Shall Become. That's the game I've been working on with him. as kind of a consultant on the project. So yeah, it's getting close to being finished. But that's a game we've been working on for a very long time together, over a year now. And that's been a lot of fun because that's a non-licensed board game. But it's, I don't know, one of my things is that I'm really good at taking something that is a license and then gamifying it.
Okay.
I know, like, there's a lot of different like schools of like how to design games. In my particular schools, you take a story or a background, and you figure out what about that is a game, and then you start making mechanics from that. So I don't really do like, I have a really cool mechanic. This is a really cool idea. How can I turn this into a game? And it's like, okay, this is a game now. Oh, it kind of reminds me of Star Trek. Let's put Star Trek on it. And it's a legit way of going about it when you have a good mechanic and you want to show a game. But I like to make a lot of lists. Like when I went with Doctor Who, like when I started designing that game, it's like, what about Doctor Who would I like to play? Because there's been a lot of Doctor Who games throughout the years, and so my game as a kid has shifted quite a bit from its original version to what it is now. And the major thing I kind of pulled from that was that a lot of the games, I just want to do the show. I want to go be the Doctor, get a companion, have adventures. I'm like, okay, well, there's the base of the game. So how does the Doctor have adventures? And then I took that and I kind of figure out what the mechanics. And in fact, Doctor Who is so nuanced that almost every aspect of the game comes from the show somehow. Like, you get up to 5 sonic screwdriver tokens to pay for your cards, and the cards have a certain sonic costs. The fact that you have a limit of 5 is from one episode where David Tennant opens up Dr. Student's screwdriver, and there's 5 power bars in there. I'm like, well, there's a number, and that's correctly pulled from the show. And so every aspect of the game is devised from the show, and that's kind of how I like to build my games. And so when it comes to IPs, they're a lot easier for me to build than non-IP games, because I have to start when I'm making my own games at home, and I have about 4 or 5 that I'm designing now. I have to create a whole world and narrative for it before I can kind of make the game. And then I take that narrative and I try to gamify it, and I kind of go backwards that way. And so I have like a whole thing. Like one of the games I'm working on now is about it's about salvage teams. They're basically in the far future, there's this war between humans and an alien race, and we're about on par with our technologies. And the idea of the game is that there's an alien ship that's far more advanced than anybody that was discovered in the human territory. The humans are going to try to salvage it, but there are saboteurs who are secretly working for the alien factions who are trying to stop you. And so I kind of created this like narrative about that, and then started pulling a game from there. One of my friends called it PC Among Us, because it's basically, instead of killing people, you're trying to sabotage systems in a ship. And there's a whole voting system where you can vote somebody and they get put in jail for a round, and then they can't manipulate the repair jobs that you're doing and stuff like that. But anyways, I had to create this whole narrative about like this, where it's coming from before I could even build the game. So I didn't even have the mechanics or anything before the narrative was done. And then I figured out where the mechanics came from.
And I actually applaud that method, because for me, I always kind of look at games as there's some sort of a story here. Like, have you ever played Lost Cities?
No, I have not.
Okay. So that came out at least 20 years ago, probably more than that. And I bring that up because it's an early game that I got in my collection. I don't know what happened to my original one, but I did get a new copy this last week. And the premise of it is it's a card game, and you're trying to put cards down in order. But then it's a Reiner Knizia game, so it's also got like math out the wazoo on it. Because like you total all of the cards, then you subtract 20, and then you multiply by another type of card that you might have. Anyways, but at the end, it's called Lost City, so it's about these archaeological expeditions, and going like getting the larger number represents going farther and farther into this expedition. So at the end, there does need to be some kind of a story. Otherwise, you're just you're just running the mechanics of a machine. And for me, that doesn't pull me into a game.
Yeah.
Doctor Who, the fact that you said it's Doctor Who, the Star Trek card game, quote unquote, I know you didn't say that exactly.
Yeah.
Makes me much more inclined to play it. Because I did enjoy that game and that narrative aspect to it. So
once you know that I'm a Decipher fan and you start playing my games, you'll see Decipher mechanics pop up in random places. One of the games we haven't really talked about yet, my Aliens board game, has a whole mechanic in that one that is about, and it uses kind of a version of the Star Wars Force mechanic of you to have a deck of cards that you use to pay for things. They go into a used pile, and then you have to cycle them back into your deck. And once your deck starts running out of cards, so there's kind of this deck cycling thing where the deck becomes a resource. But that was another crazy project. Aliens was a project that was off and on. I think I stopped. That project got greenlit and then put on hold, I think 3 or 4 times during its development. And so the first time it was on green, Phil and I were both on the project, and we were going to design it together, Phil Yates and I. And we started working on the project. I think we were given like a week to come up with. No, we given like 2 to 3 days basically to come up with a basic premise for the game and write up a brief and stuff like that. So we sat down and we came up with the premise of, we knew we wanted grids. We knew we wanted, I knew I came into it wanting to do the full story of Aliens, the movie. Like I want to be able to play through the movie. That's the big thing I wanted to do. It's like I wanted to be like Ripley or somebody and just be able to have every movie moment happen and I can play along. That's kind of the way I came from it. And then Phil had some really good ideas for how movement should work and shooting should work and that kind of stuff. So we sat down, we talked about it, we wrote up a brief, and then the game was shelved for about 3 to 4 months after that brief. And then it got like, hey, we started working the Aliens game. How close is it to being done? Like, well, we wrote you a brief. That was about it.
Well, so real quick, why did it get shelved?
Well, it has to do with Fox. At the time, they were going to produce this Aliens movie that got delayed. And so we were going to try to get it done quickly so it hit the movie date. And then it ended up being a Prometheus movie instead of Aliens. Aliens movie. So then we decided to go our own way with it. And there's a bunch of other things that kind of happened outside of our control. And then when it got started again, it was kind of like, hey, is this game just ready to go? We could just send it out. And like, no, we spent like 4 or 5 days on this. It's
nowhere near ready yet.
And so then we like, okay, well, Phil can't do anything. So Andrew, it's now your project. You start working on it. And like, okay. And I was just trying to remember, like, Phil and I had a lot of rules that we kind of put a lot of ideas, and I had to kind of re-edit them. There are some rules I didn't quite understand how Phil was going to do them in the game, so I ended up changing quite a bit from where we started, and I added that card mechanic. Because of that huge month thing, I had a time to think about it, because at the time we had tokens to measure how much ammo you had. You had tokens to like a resource management tokens to buy cards and do stuff. You had all these things you had to manage, and I realized if I made the deck the way I did, it eliminated like 4 or 5 different like things you had to track in the game. Mm-hmm. It got rid of your character's endurance tracking. It got rid of ammo. It got rid of a bunch of stuff and just consolidated into one deck. And another game that came out at the same time that inspired me was the Arkham Horror Living card game.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with that. I never played it myself, but somebody explained it to me once, and it had a mechanic that completely fixed one of the things I wanted in the game, which in Arkham Horror, when something horrific happens to you, you get negative cards put into your deck, and whenever you pull them out, you have to play them. So like if you are terrified about something, or you have a deep-seated
like an alien
fear, or and so in the game, I realized that aliens, the aliens is a big threat, but there's a huge psychological aspect to that movie, where like Burke breaks down and like runs away, locking all the doors. Those kind of things are all like key moments in the movie, but there are psychological things, and how do you make that happen in a game? And so I put cards in the game called hazards. So as you go through the deck, there's a lot of really good events, weapons, and equipment that you can get to put on your guys, but you might get a hazard that gets put on your guy, where you get like Ripley's Burning Rage put on you. It's like it's that part in the movie where she's standing in front of the alien queen, and they have this kind of unspoken understanding that if she leaves the eggs alone, that she and Newt can leave. Like they had like this little thing. It's like it's a weird kind of telepathic thing, and you even watching it, you understand that. But on her way out, you could just see her hatred take over, and she just burns all the eggs, causing the queen to go into that rage and then chase them down. And so it was her own psychological deficiency that actually stopped them from escaping cleanly. Because if she would have just left, there's a chance she could have escaped cleanly, and then she knew that the whole place is going to blow up from the nuclear explosion. So she knew that was going to be a problem, but her hatred for these things just kind of overtook her and reason went away. And so that's what these cards kind of represent, is when your emotions take over. There's even a game over man card in there for
I mean, you have to put the game over man in there.
Exactly. And so that was a really cool aspect. One of the other cool aspects I like about the game is that it's kind of a dungeon crawler-esque game where you have like your gear and you go in. But unlike a dungeon crawler where you get better loot as you go through, you start with everything. But as you go through, the deck that you have starts dwindling. And between campaign games, cards that you lose are lost forever. So if you throw a grenade, there's a chance you'll never get that grenade back and things like that. So your equipment and the stuff you use is limited. So it's kind of like a reverse of a normal dungeon crawl where you start with the best stuff and you end up with whatever you have left at the end trying to make it through and so try to survive. It fits the movie so well. It's like, and that's what I like, is when you have those moments that just like, this is what the movie would have done. This is great.
So what do you think is the most important when trying to adapt these properties to a game?
Well, the first thing I think about is if I was a fan, which luckily all the games I've done, I've been a mega fan of, but what would I want out of this? And so, like with Doctor Who, I have been kind of disappointed with most Doctor Who games throughout my life, because some of them were like, there's even
Monopoly.
one that like Monopoly, or like there's like, I think the Time Crash one where like you're collecting cards and you're doing tricks and stuff like that. It's like none of this really feels like I'm playing Doctor Who, and that's the thing I want people to come from a game. Like if you like Doctor Who and you play this game, you get to play the show, and then you have all the nostalgic hits that you want to see in those games. You get to see your favorite characters. You get to see. So I'm kind of a completionist when it comes to games. Like I like to have it like the idea like every companion's in the game, every doctor's in the game, everything that you want will be there. So no matter who you like, your favorite thing should be in there. And that's kind of one of the things that I try to hit all those notes, as well as try to keep the game going. So it's kind of, for me, the game is all about kind of that nostalgic hit for the fans, and also something that kind of lets you play that show in a way. So Aliens, you play through the whole movie. And I actually added this a secondary mode in Aliens, which I call bug hunts, which are basically video game versions of the game where you start off with a pistol and you have to go find your equipment. And and you just kind of go, and those are meant for like game nights where you don't want to play campaign, just throw it down and play.
Right.
Survival games, like how long can you survive type scenario. And so there's, that aspect in there as well. But that's one of the few times where I deviated from like canon material. It's like, well, this game needs a little bit more than just a campaign, because I don't want to build like a game that people play through once and like, well, I played the campaign, I'm done with it kind of thing. So I also want an option for people who just want to play one game. But yeah, I don't know. It's for me. When somebody plays my games, I always get a little like, I always wonder like, did they get that feel of like the show? Like, do they feel like they're playing the show? Do they understand? Like, do they get the small nods and stuff in there? And then when they do, I'm like, oh yeah, they understand the small joke. And then they're looking at these little bits and doing stuff. Like, I don't expect anyone to understand like the 5 sonic screwdriver thing, like that little thing. But like, there are other small like Easter eggs and stuff I like to put into games to see if people will find and do stuff. And then when I see them, I'm like, yes, somebody understands. So somebody noticed that. But yeah, like Doctor Who and Aliens, of course, are my 2 biggest projects I did. Smaller projects, like I just recently got kind of put in charge of some of the Star Trek Ascendancy expansions. I think we talked about this in the backstage a little bit.
Yeah.
And one of the things when they approached me was like, hey, we need some more expansions for Ascendancy. What would you want to do for that? I'm like, well, I love Next Generation, but when I think about like a giant space game that could have a combat mechanic in there for Star Trek, I always think Deep Space Nine and the Dominion War. And so I proposed the Dominion War, but I'm like, but if you want me to do the Dominion War, I have one little caveat. And like, what? It's because I'm a completionist. Like, did you be able to do the Dominion War properly? I kind of wanted to. You needed to have an unknown, a slightly unknown faction in there, which is the Breen.
Right.
Because the Breen, the Dominion Cardassians versus the Federation Klingons and Romulans is a perfect 3 versus 3 sides that's canon. So I kind of pushed the Breen on them. And I think it actually turned out to be a fantastic expansion because it does something no one else does. There's no Isolinists in any of the other faction boxes, so they care about their own territory, and they're good in their own territory. And if you get in their territory, you can get hurt very badly.
So I do want to ask this question since you're talking about expansions for Ascendancy. Whose idea was it to make the Vulcans and the Andorians? I've never bought those, but they always annoyed me.
The funny thing about those 2 expansions is that part of one of my odd jobs I did for thing is playtesting all the expansions for Ascendancy. And I playtested the core game, and every expansion except for the Vulcan and the Andorians was the only ones I never actually played or know anything about. But I think they were just running out of races, and they didn't know exactly which ones to do. And so, I don't know. I think they were stuck on the next generation. And Andorians was an interesting choice. I mean, I'm one of the few people who really like Enterprise. So
I enjoy it, but it was like the Ascendancy was very much a next generation kind of game, or next generation era game.
Yeah,
and then they throw the 2 Enterprise settings in there or factions.
Yeah, I think Vulcans was in there mainly because Vulcans are Vulcans, and they wanted something kind of with a name that catches. But yeah, it is a weird to do such an early version of the Vulcans in the whole thing. The Andorians, I don't know where those came from, but I'm guessing that Aaron, the guy at the time, Aaron, I can't remember his last name.
It was whoever was managing it before you.
Yeah, he was designing the games, because the original designer, which again his name eludes me. I should probably pull out. Do I have? No, I don't have it. He passed away, and so I think Aaron did those 2 expansions. And then I was brought on because Aaron and a few of the people from Gale Force 9 who worked in America, I never really met until later on. I worked with Aaron a little bit on the Firefly game, but really Firefly Brigands and Browncoats was more Aaron's baby than mine. I was more of a consultant on that project. But yeah, that those 2 expansions, I don't know why they chose those. It's hard, like some of the like I could see expansions for some of the things, but I don't know like what the market for them would be. Like there's a lot of races and stuff you can do, because in my mind, like you said, it's a very next generation timeline. So I would have done like Deep Space Nine and Voyager aspects first before I went back in time. But the Star Trek card game person in me always wanted to do the Borg as a playable race instead of as a faction that you work against. I mean, that's like an autonomous faction. Right. I always like playing the Borg in the Star Trek card game, but but yeah, the Vulcans and Andorians, I don't know why they came about. The Breen came about just because of my completionist, and I just needed to have the Dominion War completed if I did the Dominion War. But yeah, that's actually one of the biggest questions we got about that. Is like, why the Breen? Like, if you go online, so every time I see that, I'm like, yeah, it's me, and I give them my reasons. Like, oh, that's a good reason. But the other thing that was interesting with the Breen is that they are interestingly unique to some of the other races out there because of the fact that we know so little about them, but we do know they're territorial. And most of the other races, like Romulans, are sneaky, the Klingons are aggressive, the Federation are explory, and you have these kind of like archetypes that kind of go along with them. But they filled an archetype that really wasn't there, because the Dominion and the Klingons kind of fill the same feel of being aggressive factions, and the Cardassians kind of feel kind of Romulanly as well, in that kind of Cold War aspect feel to them. So Dominion was something I wanted to have, something like that kind of was unique to the game. But the Dominion also, the other thing I wanted was cooperative play, and not cooperative play, sorry, team play, because that was kind of, if you look at my catalog of games, that's the first non-cooperative game I worked on, was Ascendancy.
Okay.
Because Star Trek, I was a Doctor Who's a semi-cooperative game. You're not really working against each other, and in fact, you all lose together if you don't stop the Daleks. There's kind of technically a winner at the end. I think that was probably an artifact from my childhood board game, like things where there has to be a winner. But I think if I went back and changed one thing in Doctor Who, I would have changed that aspect of it, of having one player win the game. But anyways, that's a side point. And Ascendancy, I had to think about, player versus player, because that's a whole different balancing system when you're trying to balance player versus player. Like, if Doctor Who is a powerful card, but you're working together, it's not that bad. But if you give one player a powerful card in Ascendancy, it could break the whole balance of the game. So you have to worry about those type of aspects and stuff like that more in that type of game. So I came up with a system of kind of double checking the power level of all the other factions and making sure that the cards I came out with met those same types of levels. So there's a lot more kind of trying not to ruin the game by adding to the game and trying to make sure that the legacy that was left behind for these games was kind of left intact, because I know people really like Star Trek Ascendancy, and I don't want to be the reason why it folds. So I'm like, yeah. And I don't want to have a faction that no one wants to buy either. So I'm like, yep. Going through all that stuff for me was more about balance and stuff than my normal theming stuff that I kind of pull. But at the same time, I did pull a lot of theming stuff when it came to the Dominion and the Breen, because you had to keep the feeling of the faction right. Like the Dominion should have that kind of ability to have shapeshifters that like infiltrate other people's ships and make or planets and make them feel uneasy. And the Breen should have that kind of feeling of the unknown, like threat that they were in the show. And so I kind of went through and made sure that I pulled everything I knew about them and tried not to create any new canon if I could by accident, by making cards and do stuff. The Breen was a little harder to do that because there's very few things known about it. But yeah, I took what I could and I went with it.
So here's a question relating to the licensing aspect. So you were already working for the company and you just, either, hey, here's a game, or you end up on a project. How has it been dealing with the actual license holder? Because you're like, okay, I've got this game, but then has there been any pushback on anything that you've done where you're like, I want to do this thing, and they're like, no? Or
one of the interesting pushbacks, a couple of them, like with Doctor Who in the expansions, I started writing little stories explaining, like having like the doctors interacting with each other. And I think about the third or fourth one, they're like, yeah, let's not do that anymore. So like, okay. Because yeah. And then
Did they explain why?
I don't know if that was a license thing or a manager thing where they just were worried about the license people were being annoyed with that. I think for Star Trek though, we were told no. I had a whole for the Star Trek Away missions, I had a whole story and a back thing and reason why people were on the ships during Battle of Wolf 359. I had this other ship that was but basically the story was there was a ship in the Battle of War 359 that found a weakness in the Borg technology, and they were trying to exploit it, but they were destroyed. I mean, the ship was boarded before they could do that, but the information was still on the ship. And that was kind of the idea, that people were trying to find this weakness for the Borg and in the salvaging of the ships. And that was kind of the backstory, but it didn't fit with Star Trek canon, and they didn't want that in there. So I'm like, okay, that's fine.
Fair enough.
And so it's fair enough. But I always like to have that story to kind of tie things in and do stuff like that. But I figure players will make their own story. I think some of the story might still survive in the book, but I don't think all of it survived. Enterprise C went back in time and got destroyed in the base.
That was it got destroyed by the Romulans defending the Klingons, which is what was responsible for the treaty between the Federation and the Klingons, so that they weren't fighting anymore. Come on, From the Hilt, get your Trek knowledge up to snuff.
And it's the reason why Sella looks like Tasha Yar, because the Enterprise C went in the future a minute, but the Enterprise in an alternate version of Tasha Yar went back in time and became her mother.
Yeah, because
Record.
and let's be honest, that's more because Denise Crosby realized that she made a huge mistake bailing out after season 1. So
that was a fun part of and we'll get more into the Star Trek away teams down the line and future things, but that was, I will say this now because I don't know if I want to admit this when Phil and Michael are both live on there, but the Romulans were kind of my love child in the factions. I got to kind of design them, and one of the things I did, it's one of my little Easter eggs to see if anybody picks up down the line, is the names of the Romulan, the non-character Romulans are Romulan names, but 2 of them come from the William Shatner book that he wrote that he wanted to be the first Contact movie. He wrote a whole novel about how Kirk was his body was picked up by Romulans, reanimated, and he was brought back to life. And this Romulan, who was the great granddaughter of the Romulan Kirk, the Enterprise killed, the admiral that Kirk killed, and she teamed up with the Borg apparently, and her husband got assimilated, or her boyfriend got assimilated, to be like an ambassador between the Borg and the Romulan, and the Borg and the Romulan team up to reanimate Kirk and have him brainwash him to go kill Picard.
this was the Shatner novel.
Yeah, and so 2 of the characters are named after the Romulan who got assimilated and his girlfriend, who was the 2 main Romulan bad guys from that book. That's
actually fantastic.
Early days.
Yeah,
but, yeah.
So far, I only have the core game because let's just say that the fact that I bought the core game was already stretching the wife's tolerance of what I'd spent on games that week.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm gonna have to come back for the expansions at a later date.
One thing I like about that game is a couple of things. Like, when we started, we were inspired by lots of games. One of them, of course, being Warhammer Underworlds, Shadespire, that whole aspect. But one of the things that we didn't like about those games is, and I think one of those downfalls, is that you have to buy every expansion in that game to get all the generic cards to be able to be competitive. And the game with a bunch of generic cards. And so we decided right at the off that we would not have generic cards in the game, period. And that all cards would be faction locked. So if you want to play the game and you like one faction, you only have to buy those faction boxes to get the cards. And you don't have to buy outside factions. And the other thing we did was we allowed players to swap out one model in each team with another team. We call them our mission specialists, so that if you buy future boxes, you can actually mix and play them together. And so you're not just buying a box just for the cards and going with it. So that was one of the things that was important to us when we did that game, was to make sure that the things that we didn't like about the games that we were inspired by weren't in that game. That was
so I know
that was 3 people.
I know it'll come up. I know it'll come up when we all get together to talk about away missions. I mean, so I actually, you know what? I'm going to frame this into an Andrew question. So when you're coming up with a game, do you try to keep it all self-contained, or do you try to build in the hooks for later expansions?
With Doctor Who and other things, I knew I was going to do everything. I was already given the green light to do all the Doctor expansions and stuff like that, so I designed them together for the most part. So all the Doctors and stuff existed when we were playtesting and doing all that stuff. So that particular game I designed with expansions in mind, because we had a certain budget for that game. That's when I don't know if you realized, or I don't think anybody outside us would realize that we went from the Ascendancy level size boxes to the square size boxes around the time of Doctor Who and those things. That was a marketing decision because of Barnes & Noble, actually. I think it was the ones that inspired that change in our thing. We got a huge deal with Barnes & Noble, who wanted Doctor Who, but they would only take it if it was $50.
Okay.
So we had to redesign the game to be a $50 game. So it was originally going to be another Ascendancy size game.
So it was going to be an Ascendancy box where you just had all 13 Doctors or however many at the time.
It was that was going to be 6 Doctors in the core box. In fact, if you look online, sometimes you'll see some of the artifacts of like our old marketing which was this little bigger box before we got that deal with them. And basically, Barnes and Noble told us that they like to sell board games, but they only sell board games. They like to only buy board games unless they're really popular. That $50 less, because that's the maximum amount somebody would pay for a gift for somebody, and they see themselves as a gift company. When you go and you buy a gift from them, and then you just have, and they don't see anyone really buying a gift over $50 for somebody in the board game realm. And so that's kind of where their mindset was. So we redesigned our kind of mindset from $100 games to $50 and $60 games. And that's kind of where we pushed from that point on. Of course, I don't know what the mindset is nowadays at Battlefront, but that's why the boxes got smaller, and we did that. So lots of times we were constrained with the size of boxes, like Aliens. I designed all of Aliens together as one mission. I mean, one idea, but when I first started, and then I was told, like, I can't have that much stuff, and then I had to figure out how much components and stuff I can put in there, and so I had to engineering. The Calvin Enterprise is bigger on the inside. Dr. Shitsu, yeah.
It's called a crossover from the hilt.
Yeah. Actually, do I have it right there? No, I moved it. I have the Doctor Who crossover comic book. That's Doctor Who and Star Trek.
Oh.
Has, in fact, if I do my lock screen, it's one of my favorite covers. If you can see it, is Geordi and the 11th Doctor.
Nice.
The Borg team up with the Cybermen. And the Doctor has to come over to the Star Trek universe to help him. But yeah, crossover would be great. But yeah, a lot of those things we do think of expansions and stuff like that. Some games we design as one-offs that turn into, or might turn into, other things and bigger things. I like Tusk was designed as a one-off. I don't think it was designed with expansions in mind. Something like that. So some of our games are like that, but most of the games I've been put on were ones that we considered to have expansions for in the future. The only one that we're still discussing is Nemesis, Doctor Who Nemesis, the other Doctor Who board game I came up with, which is the one we play as the villains of Doctor Who.
Okay. But so, like, when you're normally building a game, like you said, you've got like 3 or 4 that you're working on right now. Are you trying to figure out ways that you can expand them, or as well, or is it just like let's focus?
My personal projects are one-off games. I haven't really thought of anything that is like that's going to have a lot of expansions for my personal things I've been working on. But then again, a lot of those I'm working on with the idea that they might become print and play games down the line.
Okay.
So I kind of want to do just a lot of different things. Like the repair ship one I was talking about earlier was one. Another one that I've publicly started designing was my conspiracy game. I don't know if you.
I watched a couple of your videos. You've kind of fallen off the wagon on making those.
Yeah, I stopped making them mainly because YouTube started flagging my videos as misinformation videos, and so.
Oh, because they're conspiracy.
Yeah, so I felt like the flat Earth thing. So if you watch some of my flat Earth ones, there'll be some disclaimers on the bottom, and then little links to videos talking about how the Earth isn't really flat and things like that. And so
board game design.
Yeah, so I kind of stopped that. And the other thing I've been thinking about redesigning how I want to do that process. So I'm actually now working on doing something that's a little bit more of a classroom-esque type thing with bullet points and things that pop up, and less of me rambling and thinking, because the whole thing is me thinking about the board game and designing it in real time. So I'll pause and think about things, and it's like that's not really good viewing experiences. So I've kind of been rethinking how I'm going to do that, and so I'm kind of rebrand it and kind of come back at it in a probably next mid-September, I think is my plan on that one. But yeah.
Okay. So then, all right. Actually, one aspect that we didn't really touch on. So you were working for Battlefront in New Zealand. Actually, that's the interesting thing is you mostly seem to do your design work for Gale Force 9, which, if I'm not mistaken, is actually still based out of the United States. Is that correct?
Yes and no. Yes.
Yes.
Was based out of the United States, but I think most of the Gale Force 9 people now are now just out of Battlefront directly.
Okay.
But yeah, Battlefront owns Gale Force 9. They bought them out a
Oh, that
while
was a
back.
long time ago.
Yeah. And so that was just the name for the board game stuff. But yeah, a lot of my stuff ended up being Gale Force 9. Like Tanks started off as a Battlefront thing and then turned into a Gale Force 9 release. And yeah, a lot of my stuff ended up being Gale Force 9 stuff. Of course, I've done some things for Battlefront. Like I say I wrote. Michael started working at Battlefront again and then got a new job and left. And there were a couple of his projects that I finished for him. So one, which is a book he outlined, I just had to kind of finish what he started. And the other one was the concepts for a book, which was the D-Day British and the D-Day American Flames of War. So those two I kind of took over for him, and I worked on those. And man, for a person who's not really good at spelling and grammar and stuff like that, who just wants to focus on mechanics and games, giving me a whole book to write was scary. But then I kind of learned the process, and to be honest, I could do another Flames of War book. Not as hard as I thought they would be, like just on the outset, because you get a lot of help and a lot of writing, and writing a lot of those not fictional, but like inspirational, based on history stories and stuff like that is actually a lot easier than I thought they would be. I mean, outsourced a lot of the those types of writing anyway, so I didn't have to be responsible for the spelling and grammar and those things. But then doing the points and the special rules and stuff like that came a little bit easier. And luckily, Michael had most of. I believe it was the American book. Now I can't remember. It's been like 3 or 4 years ago, so I'm trying to remember. He had one of the two that was pretty much. I just had to kind of finish like small parts, and then I could use that as a blueprint for the next one, and kind of went on with that. But yeah, most of my stuff ended up being Gale Force 9 stuff.
Okay. Sorry. But you were a regular employee, but then COVID hit. And
yes.
Now that one was kind of interesting because had you been home on vacation? And
so it was a triple thing. One, I wanted to come home on vacation. I haven't been home for a while. My parents just visited us in New Zealand, and so my plan was to go home and visit them. But I also needed to renew my visa at that same time. So I'm like, well, I can do a lot of births because New Zealand prefers you not to be in the country when you apply for your visa. So I was going to leave the country and then apply for it.
Even though you're a resident and an employee, and here,
well,
go back and screw it all up.
Technically a resident. I was just on a worker's visa. Okay. But yeah, and so I did that. And actually, it was a weird thing because before I did that, they sent me on to Australia. So it's the first time I've ever been to Australia, right when COVID was kind of like in the background, people were talking about in the news. So I got a flight to Australia. And this is during all those wildfires and stuff like that. Right. And I did the CanCon tournament, and I got super sick on the way there, and I lost my voice, and so I had to run this Flames of War tournament. And like this last day, I was writing things down, telling people round 3, that kind of stuff. I was going around and doing stuff because my voice was completely gone. But that was an interesting trip to go down and visit Australia, and then I came back, and then flew back home, and then I flew back home. I think I was here like for a week. And then I flew up to Idaho. And when I was in Idaho, that's when COVID super hit. And I was visiting my sister. And there was a big decision. Do I fly back home and be with my parents? Or do I stay with my sister and stay in that bubble? And I ended up flying home because I wanted to be there for my parents. Because both my parents had like diabetes and other things at the time. And that was a high risk for COVID. So I flew home. And it's one of the best decisions I ever made because sadly, my mom passed away 2 years afterwards, and I got doing things. So I got an extra year or 2 with her,
right?
Instead of staying in Idaho and waiting there. And so, so it was one of the things where I was very upset. I was very angry about losing my job, being stuck there for a while, and then now it's like I can't imagine not having that time with my mom. Like I'm so happy that happened to me because I wouldn't trade that for anything. But the other crazy thing that happened while I was here was they bulldozed down my house that I was living in New Zealand. So my brother had to rush over there. And so my house
still have stuff there.
I'm still living there. I just went home to renew my visa. I was going to be back like in a month, like less than a month back in. Thing was the idea, and so I still had a house I was paying rent on and stuff like that. And I got a notice that my roommate's like, hey, the landlord came by and they sold the property to the mall next door, and we have until the end of the year to move out.
So whatever happened to all your stuff in New Zealand?
So pretty much all my stuff was there. So my brother Michael and one of my roommates packed it all up and shipped it over.
Oh, okay.
about a year and like almost a year, I think, for it to finally ship over because of all the COVID restrictions and all that stuff. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Like hyperspace bypass. Exactly. Yeah, if it wasn't for Michael, and my roommate at the time, David, I would have lost all my miniatures, all my game stuff. One of the big things that I was kind of proud of at the time, you can kind of see it here. I was a huge Star Wars Destiny player when that came out, and I was New Zealand's only national champion for that game.
Wow.
With the one national championship they had before the FFG decided to stop that game. But yeah, it was. I played a lot of it, so I had a huge collection of it. I owned I had every single set, a play set of every single card that was printed at that time, and I think there was about 9 sets.
That is a lot.
Yeah, and you only need 2 of each
cards, a lot of dice.
Cards, a lot of dice. But I love that game. It's weird. It's one of the few competitive card games that I just really like the head versus head version of it. I think I liked it mainly because there wasn't very many players who were creating a variety of net decks. And so I would come up with something crazy and then it would work. And then people were like, how did you make that work? In fact, I got interviewed twice just for doing that. It's funny because they interviewed me and they found out I was a game designer after they interviewed me about my decks. Because I produced 2 decks that one that won nationals, New Zealand nationals was considered not very popular. In fact, it went to Worlds that year. I couldn't afford to go to Worlds, but because of my New Zealand thing, it got traction in Worlds, and it won Worlds, and it got nerfed the next like 3 months after Worlds. So one of my decks was a little too powerful, but yeah. So I have a lot of that stuff.
For those that might be just listening instead, From the Hilt says, seriously, that sucks, Andrew. But on that note, Vacations and Bulldozers, the next great science fiction game. Race home before your house is destroyed. So, all right. So the reason that I wanted to bring that up, so you came home to renew your visa, and then you can't go back to New Zealand. At what point did Battlefront decide, well, we're going to have to cut you loose? Like, was that like right away, or?
It was interesting because, they kept on sending me projects. So I worked on the World of Tanks. Do I have one of those here? Yeah, right here. World of Tanks. The rebranding of tanks to because that became a licensed game later on. And I started doing that. And I think it just got to a point where we both kind of realized, without really discussing it or talking to each other, that it was just going to be easier if I just became a commission designer for them and I did work for them. And to be honest, it's great for me because I only now do the work I love. I don't have to do like the busy web page stuff and to do things I'm not very good at. I can now focus on just designing games for them. And work has still been kind of consistent. I've been given 2 to 3 kind of major projects ever since, every year. So I did the Breen and Star Trek shortly after that. I did the Doctor Who Nemesis game. I just finished a new game for them that's yet to be revealed, so I can't really talk about it. But,
no spoilers. You can tell me on stream.
The only thing I'll say on stream, which will kind of give it away, is it's based off a cartoon series of a very popular sci-fi series that has been around since, well, forever.
So it's not Bluey. No, I'm just kidding.
Not Bluey. It's a little lower than that. I would say it's on a different deck. But yeah, so that's been a really fun project to do. And Aliens is such a good project. One of the things that surprised me with Aliens, From the Hilt just mentioned Aliens, is the fan base reaction to that game. Was the biggest reaction I got from any of my board games I've ever made. The amount of YouTube videos, the amount of people playing the game, painting, doing model stuff, and then doing their own 3D versions of the board game, and just like the personal hobby and just like the creativity from that fan base has kind of blown me away. It's an amazing fan base. If you ever look at some of the Alien stuff that people are putting together, the people who have like whole like HUDs to put all your cards into, to 3D renderings of all the map tiles, to creating the vehicles that are just little cardboard cutouts in the game. It's just crazy what people are doing for Aliens right now. I don't know. It's one of those games. I think it hit like Firefly, where there wasn't a game in the market like it. and so the fan base didn't have that, like the actual license. There's a lot of Aliens games out there that are Aliens in everything but name.
Right.
But at that time, I think it hit the fact that people wanted that Aliens game. They wanted to play Space Hulk, but not be Space Hulk. They wanted to be aliens, the actual aliens. They wanted to play and stuff like that. And one of the things that was interesting was I was kind of worried about how well Aliens was going to do because of Nemesis. And everybody was talking about how good Nemesis was. And people were like, well, this Aliens game doesn't have a trader mechanic and blah, blah, blah. And then when it finally came out, people were like, well, actually, this is based off the second movie. So this is completely different from the first movie. And then, I don't know, it's just like the amount of love. That's one of the weirdest things when I went to Essen last year was like I had these weird micro flashes of being a celebrity, which I don't have anywhere. So like I had people coming up, and I had like at one point a line of like 4 or 5 people wanting my autograph to sign games. Like this is the weirdest thing to actually have somebody notice you and actually want you to sign things. It's weird. And then I went back to America, and no one knows who I am here, so it's fine. Yeah.
I mean, I know who you are, but
yeah.
There's that. So I don't even. Okay, so
ADD tangent.
Yeah, right. So then when you went freelance, I mean, have you done any work with anyone besides Battlefront yet, or?
Yeah, I've done 2 jobs now. There's Bryce, who made a game called Rescuing Robin Hood, asked me to come on board and help him finish it. He pretty much had the game done. He just needed something. He's like, this is missing something. And I looked at the game, and I'm like, well, there's no real reason to play the game again. And so I created a points mechanic system for him, so you can actually, at the end of the game, you can have a score and be like, can I beat the score next time? And then I had these little objective things that change from game to game. So then there's something that was different from each game and stuff. So I gave him some new mechanics and stuff for that game. And but yeah, the game he had already was kind of fun, like kind of deck builder type aspect game where you create a team of merry men and you go rescue Robin Hood from the sheriff of Nottingham because he's been captured. And so that's the whole aspect, is that you're trying to save Robin Hood. And so so that game was kind of my first non-Battlefront game. I worked with him on that, and he got me in contact with Marcel, who was working on Orange Shell Com at the time. And that game in particular is one that I've been working on for over a year now. And that one's been a lot of fun. I don't know, just helping other game designers finish their games. Like coming in with like a little bit of experience to be like, hey, because that's what Phil Yates and Michael did for me when I started doing my board game stuff, and helped me lay out a rule book and help me figure out some of the things I just didn't really know. Like I had the mechanics down, but like, how do you put that in a rule book? How do you do these kind of things? And they both had that experience writing for Flames of War for so long that they were like, hey, try this, do this, those kind of things. And so, so doing that for other people, it's been kind of a fun experience, and helping other people kind of polish the games and kind of find that last mechanic that might be missing, or find or telling them that this is finished. Because a lot of times you'll be fiddling with something for so long, like this is done. You don't need to do anything else to this, that kind of thing. But yeah.
Okay. So then unfortunately we don't. Well, I mean, I have a feeling we could just keep talking about whatever all night, but obviously due to time. So one thing I do want to touch on, and obviously it gets brought up in all sorts of YouTube videos and whatnot about this. Like for you, what do you think? What's a piece of advice about designing games that you don't think anyone else really talks about?
Well, that's a good question.
I just made it up on the fly.
Yeah, one of the things that Phil Yates told me when I was designing Doctor Who was 2 things. So he told me that I kind of took on as kind of like mantras that I think about whenever I do my game design stuff now. First thing is know when to start a game, and understand that sometimes you're not starting at the right place. With Doctor Who, when you started playing the game, you were just a doctor and you had nothing. You had to go find everything. And he's like, well, you spent 2 to 3 turns setting up. Where should you start the game? Because what if you started on turn 3? And then I'm like, oh wow, that sped the game way up. You'd have all these like misfires at the beginning of the game. It made the game run way better. It's a lot. So so I can't exactly how he's phrased it now, but it's like know when to start a game. It's kind of basically what he says. Like always look through your games and try to see if what would happen if you started on turn 3 or 4, if that makes it better. And kind of look at that. But the other piece of advice, the one that helps me with all the playtesting I do in playtest groups, is like people will tell you how to change your game to the nth degree. Every playtester has an idea and an opinion, and to be able to kind of cipher which ones are good and which ones are bad, he gave me this kind of thing to look for. And it's like when a person talks about feelings, it's take more heedance of that advice than when somebody wants to give you an idea. So someone's like, oh, actually, I like this, but I think you should add this mechanic to the game. This kind of thing is you can probably throw away. But when someone says, I feel like the game is a bit sluggish, then that's a actual mechanic issue that you need to go in and fix. Feelings tend to be more important than precise, detailed advice when it comes to playtesting. And I find that's actually one of the things that has come up a lot in my playtesting is when somebody says they feel something, it normally means it's a bigger problem that I need to go and sort out. But if somebody tells me this, change this right away, it's mainly a preference, and I need to judge and see if that preference is going to be the overarching preference of players, or if people would prefer it not that way. And so I have to kind of figure those things out. But yeah, feelings is a huge thing when you look at playtesters. So when they talk feelings, that's the advice you need to heed first. But yeah.
Okay. And then what would you say is the most important piece of advice you could give someone who wants to get started doing this? Go back to when you were 8 and try starting then. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that it's like every profession. In fact, Michael, I think, was one who told me this, and I kind of, yeah, that's true. Anything that people say about writing a novel is true for reading, creating a book. Read lots of novels. Play as many games as you can. When you see a good mechanic, steal it. That kind of thing. Because that's how a lot of things. There's another bit of advice from, I believe Phil told me this one is, a true designer steals, he doesn't borrow. So a true artist steals, doesn't borrow. That's what it is. So you don't borrow a mechanic. You don't say, well, this is the mechanic from this game, and I'm not going to change it. It's in this game. You steal it and you make it your own, and you kind of grow upon it. It's like the best example of that is Dominion. The first, yeah, that's true. Dominion is the first kind of deck building game that was popular. Without it, we wouldn't have deck building games nowadays. And people, take that idea of deck building, and they made it their own. And now we have all these different deck builders that do all these different things, from the Marvel deck builders to, the Harry Potter one that USopoly came out with. And they're all great games, but those games wouldn't be able to exist if Dominion didn't exist. And so you can kind of see the idea that they stole that idea 100% from Dominion, but at the same time, they made it their own and then expanded upon it. And now we have an evolution of a game, if you will, to where we have now. And I think the whole steal, don't borrow aspect is a very important thing when you're designing games, is to make sure you're not borrowing things like when I said my Doctor Who game was way too much close to Star Trek when I went in there, like I need to change a couple of these things because it's a Star Trek. That Star Trek aspect is too prominent in the game. That, and also people don't want to play. I mean, people probably might want to play Doctor Who Star Trek cards, but that's not what we are in the business of selling. By the way, if anybody watching this is another side tangent ADD thing. Michael and I have this constant look to see who has the rights to the Star Trek CCG card game, because we have ins at Battlefront, and we've always wanted to make an LCG version of that game. So if anybody out there knows who has the rights to that game today, let us know.
But then I guess a corollary would be, why not make your own?
Well, yeah. The thing is that
I mean, Star Trek. Let's be honest. We enjoyed it, but there was a lot of moving parts in that game.
I mean, I have made simplified versions of that game. The game I can't talk about has a lot of inspiration from that Star Trek game. You'll see it when it comes out. Doctor Who has that. In fact, even Aliens uses the probing mechanic from the Deep Space Nine era of that game as part of its thing. Remember that, like, you reveal top card of your deck, depending on what type of card it was, this effect goes off, and it would have like 3 effects on the card.
It's
very complicated
been like
card.
25 years, dude.
Yeah. But yeah, and so a lot of those things, and they all bleed through. And lots of times, like, I didn't realize that was that mechanic till after I designed the game. I was like, oh yeah, that actually that came from that. Pretty sure it's all subconscious because it's all there. That's one of the things. I was talking to a Magic the Gathering game designer once. Can't remember his name, but he was talking about designing cards and how he doesn't allow himself to read people's custom cards online because they will just go in his head and might pop it out and be like, that was my idea that I published, blah blah blah. So he just doesn't look at any of that stuff because he's worried about stealing people's ideas. I'm like, but how cool is it for that person to see that a designer looked at his thing and liked his idea and published it? That's pretty cool. So I don't know.
Right.
It's one of those things where I think you can think too hard into those things, but yeah, I think going back to the original question, which I'm ADDing around, the advice I give a new designer is to make sure that when you make a game, to make sure that it's your own and not a carbon copy of somebody else's game. Make sure that you take ownership of those mechanics and you change them in a way that makes them unique and adds to the story of that mechanics, like growth and the thing like in Dominion. Because if I used to make Dominion again, then it's not really that great, But if you make a game that's, well, you could get sued for that. But if you make a game and that takes that and takes it to the next level, stuff like that, then that's good.
Steal parts, not the whole thing.
Oh, for sure. I've had people who like showed me games and that's like, this is just like that with extra steps. Like, oh, it's Monopoly, but now with math. It's like, well,
right.
That's the other thing too, is that there's no game that can't teach you something. Monopoly is kind of seen as like the worst game ever made. It was actually meant to teach people the pitfalls of capitalism, and it did the exact opposite and became the most capitalistic board game ever designed. But
right.
That game has a mechanic in there that people don't realize that it's one of the best mechanics ever made for games, why people come back to it. It's one of the very few games where you care about everybody else's turn and more than your own, where you're engaged in everybody else's turn, because that's when you make money, is on everybody else's turn. And if you can capture that in your regular board games, then that's a feeling like if you can give somebody something that they care about when it's not their turn, then the games mentally go by faster. But if you're like flipping through your phone because it's like 20 minutes before it's your turn, there's nothing for you to do, that kind of stuff. So always think about, how much time. That's the other thing Michael said, that I believe it was from one of the books that he was reading about and he was telling me about, and it's kind of stuck in my head, is don't waste your audience time. Like, don't write a chapter in your novel that's completely useless, that no one cares about. Your audience's time is worth something. And I think about that when I do my board game design, is don't waste players' time. So in fact, my new game design, I'm playing around with the concept of not having turns, whereas everyone does something. So it's kind of that Race for the Galaxy feel if you played that board game, where you have actions that everybody chooses one of 6 actions, and it's on a card and you play it down. And when it goes to the action phase, everyone flips their action over, and those are the actions everybody does together. And then the person who chose the action gets a better version of it. So like mine might say draw 2 cards, everybody else draws 1 card. And then you go through the actions, and then you do all the actions that are chosen. And some might allow you to build things, some might allow you to buy things, some, those kind of things. And if those actions aren't chosen, you don't do it that round. So players are thinking about the actions they take, but no one's has an individual turn. There might be priority to, like I draw a card first and then you draw, but there's no individual turns and there's no downtime in the game. So players are kind of doing things at once. And so I'm trying to play around with that concept of what if there aren't turns, even in non-cooperative games. And so that's one of the things that that conspiracy game is based on. And in fact, when I was doing my conspiracy game, Father's Day came up, and I was trying to figure out what to do for my dad for Father's Day. And I designed him a game in 4 days. It was a whirlwind game, but there's an old movie called Magnificent Men and the Flying Machines. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I want to say I am, but don't
But
trust me.
it's an old, I want to say 60s 70s movie, where it's basically like Wright brothers airplanes, and they're racing across the British Canal to get to France. It's a very early aviation day, very rat racy, where like there's a guy like sabotaging other people's planes and doing all that stuff. And so I created a game that used that same mechanic I have in my conspiracy game, where no one has individual turns. They have these cards, and I did it in 4 days. It was crazy. But yeah, it was a fun experience to kind of come up with a game that has that kind of simultaneous play, but yet keep it really basic. So like there's only those 6 actions you can choose from in that game, and then you just race. Whoever gets to the end first wins. And so it's a very simple game that I know my dad would enjoy. My dad likes the kind of games at the level of complexity of like Wings of Glory and that kind of thing. And so I try to keep it around that level. And so it was interesting when you think about like how much complexity you put into games and stuff. Like all my other games are super complicated compared to like the game I created for my dad. And so, and my latest game I made for Battlefront was another interesting thing because it was a very simple game, kind of more on the flux level of complexity. And so you're playing around with these kind of ideas. And that one though was really fun because there is no turns and everybody's doing things all at once. And yeah, it's just great. It's mayhem.
So, all right. Well, I have absolutely loved this. For being in the same general area, we have not talked at all anywhere near enough. So, thank you so much for doing it, especially because it was kind of short notice. But that's partly because I do want to talk about Away Team, but because of who all's involved in that, it's like, I want to do this, but I want to give Andrew some one-on-one time. So anyways, all right. I'm rambling a little bit. So everybody, if you haven't yet, hit the like button. Andrew, anything that you want to shout out, anything you want to talk about before we end the stream?
Well, if anybody wants to find out more stuff about the game stuff I'm working on, I have a site on Facebook, Timelapse GS, which is kind of my business Facebook page. You can find me there, and then the same name on YouTube and Twitch when I get back into streaming. I'm hoping to do a course basically on how to design a game from start to finish on Twitch, and then it'll go onto YouTube. Not really trying to do like a full like online streaming stuff, but at the same time I like the idea of having like something online that people can find when they're trying to find like how to design a game and stuff like that, and have like do this, because I don't know, I think it's one of the things that I think everybody could design a game if they really wanted to, and I kind of want to give them the tools to kind of realize that they can. I think that was the biggest thing that my mom did for my brother and I, was by designing games so young, is that we understood that you could just change games and design your own things at such an early age. Kind of broke that idea of like it was like the sacred thing that you had to follow every rule in the game. You can make your own. In fact, Michael and I were playing giant games of Star Trek, Star Wars, Doctor Who, and I can't remember what the fourth one. Oh, Lord of the Rings cards all at once. We created a whole board, and we were bounty hunters, and we had to find like we would go like on the Enterprise, and like Smog was the bounty, and so my Boba Fett was going over trying to get Smog. We had to fight through the card to get to him, and it was this giant board game we made out of all our games, and we just had a fun time making games and just creating our own worlds, even with stuff that already existed. But yeah, anyways, that's where you can find me outside of this. I do I also try to do some video game stuff, which I'm not very good at, and I try to do magic content, which I'm also not very good at. So yeah.
Well, I mean, regardless, I mean, obviously you're having some success. You've got, Away Teams that just released, Aliens, Doctor Who. I mean, and it's before we started the stream, you were even telling the story, being able to go and see your game, amongst other, memorabilia from Doctor Who, things like that. I think that, obviously you're having some success, and so I'm excited to know you and know that you're doing all these fun things. So So folks, we're going to end it here because I actually have to go to my regular job because I hate myself and I stay up all night. But outside of that, check out Doctor Who Time of the Daleks, Aliens, Another Glorious Day in the Core, Tanks. You're working on Star Trek Ascendancy, Star Trek Away Teams. Any other games people should check out?
If you're a fan of Magic, like Commander in Pacific, and you like Doctor Who, and you like the game Villainous, well, the game Doctor Who Nemesis is basically Doctor Who Commander with a villainous twist where you have the boards and you do action stuff like that. So it's a weird hybrid of those things. But if you like those games, it's another good one too.
Awesome. So, all right. Well, folks, we're ending it here. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night. It's